Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our series, Dumbfounding Definitions, Dizzying Distinctions, and Diabolical Doctrines, series sorting through some of the jargon of philosophy. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at what is the etymological fallacy. Now, the etymological fallacy occurs when you incorrectly interpret a term used in an argument as having one definition when it was intended to have another. This fallacy is often committed out of ignorance rather than an active attempt to make a bad argument. Sometimes because the person committing it does not understand the historical meaning of a word, or because the original argument was poorly explained. Now, this fallacy is similar to the equivocation fallacy, which is where one term is used in two different ways in the same argument. The etymological fallacy instead occurs when the original argument uses a term in one way and someone misinterprets that argument to use the term in a different way. This often occurs when interpreting historical arguments, or arguments originally offered in a different language and then translated. The fallacy is committed when a modern meaning of the term or literal translation is used instead of a contemporaneous or more nuanced translation. This often occurs with interpretations, particularly of ancient Greek philosophy, where there is both a language barrier and a difference in time period that is preventing people from using the interpretation of particular words that would have been used in that time period. For example, the ancient Greek word eudaimonia is sometimes translated directly as happiness or even pleasure, when it actually meant something more similar to the good life or fulfillment. Sometimes it's left untranslated for this reason, indicating that it's a word that doesn't have a perfect correspondent in English to prevent people from committing the etymological fallacy and saying that, oh, this ancient Greek philosopher is just talking about pleasure, they're just talking about happiness, when in fact they're talking about a more complicated and nuanced concept in ancient Greek. Similarly, in some places where Aristotle says that art imitates nature, he's often actually saying that techne imitates nature, where techne includes modern conceptions of art, but also practical skills of creating, crafting, and building things that we might not consider art, but we might consider more craft. Even in modern contexts, in the same language, this fallacy can occur when people fail to clearly define the terms they're using, or don't share the same definition of a term. This often happens when you're speaking across disciplines, and two different disciplines use the same word, but have it mean different things. Even within philosophy, though, there are often words that have different meanings to different people, or within different sub-disciplines of philosophy. Words like realist, egoist, materialist, atheist lack a single definition. An argument about realists may be valid in reference to a scientific realist, but not an artistic realist. You might be committing this fallacy if you critique an argument about scientific realism by using the definition of artistic realism. The best way to avoid this fallacy in your work is to practice the philosophical principle of charity. Interpret the arguments of others as the strongest they could be. If there is one interpretation of a term that makes the argument invalid and another that makes it strong, the principle of charity says you should take the second interpretation. The place that this doesn't always work is with ancient philosophy, particularly if you're trying to do history of philosophy and not necessarily capture the best argument of someone, but try to really understand what that author is saying, at which point your best solution for that is to actually study the history and study the meanings of those terms or the particular language you may be looking into to better understand the context that author may be speaking in. But in general, when you're arguing in a modern context, you want to practice the principle of charity and say which version of this term or what interpretation of this term would make the argument as strong as it could be. Barring that, ask your interlocutors to define their terms. Often people may be talking past each other or maybe missing each other because they're simply using different meanings of a word that might be accepted in different disciplines. Don't get bogged down in arguing semantics of the right definition of a term. Focus on ensuring that you and those you're arguing with have the same meaning in mind and go from there. And if you can't agree on a single meaning, accept that there may be multiple meanings of that word, and you can even define them as this is what I mean when I say belief, this was what you mean when you say belief. We'll call one belief A and one belief B to be really clear so that you don't end up in traps either of the fallacy of etymology or the fallacy of equivocation where someone may be switching between those two meanings. There are many deeper questions in the philosophy of language that we won't get into here around whether or not people can even really understand what other people mean by the words that they use if we're all really using slightly different definitions. Check out our videos on Wittgenstein, language games, the postmodern philosophy of language for more on that. Here are some examples. Person A. The critics say that painting is awful. Premise 2, most people agree that the painting is awful, therefore the painting is very bad. Person B, no, the original meaning of awful means awe-inspiring, so that means the painting is actually very well painted. Well, clearly this is a fallacy because it seems like a charitable interpretation of person A's argument would be to use the modern definition of awful, not the original definition of it, which means very bad, not awe-inspiring. And so person B is committing this fallacy because they're misinterpreting person A's use of the word. All right, person A, John is nice, therefore he's a good person. Person B, no, the original meaning of nice is foolish, so John must be foolish. Once again, clearly person B is interpreting this argument incorrectly, not using the correct term or the meaning of nice that person A means to be using or is intending to use in the argument, not being charitable with that argument. It's not to say that there is a right or wrong meaning of nice. If you're reading a text from a particular time period and interpreting nice as a good-natured person, you may be interpreting that inaccurately. The point is to bring context to it, not to have an argument about semantics. Another example. Person A, you are a realist, so you think that scientific theories can provide knowledge. Person B, no, I'm actually an artistic realist. I think we should make art that accurately represents the real world. Here it's person A that's committing the fallacy, because person A is making an assumption about what person B means when they say realist. And person B is clarifying, which is exactly what you should do, saying, when I say realist, I mean an artistic realist. Perhaps person B lives in a world of aesthetics where that's all you're talking about. And so is clarifying that says, you can't assume what I believe about scientific theories because artistic realist is a completely separate idea from a scientific realist. And finally, person A, you are an atheist, so you hate God. Person B, no. Atheism has many meanings. The most common meaning, and the one that I use, is someone that lacks a belief in any God. As with the realist example, there are multiple meanings of atheist, and person B is defining what they mean by atheism. Particularly for arguments like this, it's not productive to get into that semantic argument of what does this really mean. A term or a word is just a shorthand of explaining, particularly a position, is explaining what you mean by that. And so just replacing that term always with this thing. When I say atheist, I mean someone that doesn't believe in God. So you can, if the term offends you, you can completely eliminate it from your speech and just say someone that does not believe in God. And you would have the same underlying arguments. And so getting into this kind of semantic back and forth about what does it really mean isn't as effective as making sure you have a shared definition of the word and then having that conversation. What do you think? Are there any instances of the fallacy of etymology that you have witnessed recently? How should you interpret an argument where the terms are ambiguous? Give me your thoughts in the comments below. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org. Subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can make sure you catch all the videos that we put out. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.